Welcome. Happy Thursday, everybody. I am here with Jason Coleman today. It's always nice to have a different face on the open office hours because normally it's the Kim and Sam show. But Jason, what are you going to talk about today?
Talking about selling your membership business. So anyone who's thinking about this or just planning ahead, if you run a business and it makes money, you don't want it to just disappear. If something goes wrong, it's good to be ready for, handing it off. And also, I think it's good in business to do this every once in a while. Prepare to sell. It makes your business better, even if you're not going to sell. And so this will be interesting for anyone who's thinking about, selling your business or even growing your business and just curious about what's my business worth? How do I think about that? So I'll be diving into that.
Yeah, and this can go for, I get about down both roads of the unfortunate side of maybe your membership failed, which we never want for you, but maybe it's this is a good exit strategy if that's the case for you. Or it could go for the really exciting side of things where your membership is so big and now you're selling it and you get to retire and live your life because you grew your nest egg.
Yeah. One of the most exciting aspects of working in this business that we do, like Paid Memberships Pro, where we help people get paid, is that we've seen customers use our software, build successful businesses, and then sell them and retire. And there's one guy, Rob, who sold his site. I think his site changed software after it sold, though. But which is interesting. So I'll get into it. It's kind of like, what are the assets you're actually selling? But then he retired to Puerto Rico, and he's living in paradise and started a yoga studio. And so it's like that could, I don't know if you all want to start yoga studios, but that could be the dream. Yeah. So please give us some comments and questions. Raise your hand if you're in the comments, so let us know you're here. We do know it's kind of sensitive to talk in public, like, hey, I might be considering selling my company. So we're going to delete the comments, the live stream comments at the end of this video. So if it is useful to us, if you're watching and you want the best content possible for me, you can tell me just really quickly, like the size of your business in terms of members and revenue and like what industry it's in. That would help me direct, my examples and things towards the people who are actually watching. Otherwise, I think I can dive in.
Yeah. Are you ready for me to share your screen?
Yeah. All right. Cool. So I think I've been doing a lot of hand wavy Google Sheets stuff. And so I set the presentation up this way. And I'll try to calculate some examples for these things on when we get into like metrics and numbers that might be confusing. But one of the first questions asked is like, so we're saying like, who's selling? Good times, bad times? When do you sell? How do you think about this? And I forget where I first saw this. It's probably someone's formula from forever ago, but there's kind of three things to think about when you're selling a business. It's like, think about yourself as the owners and your family, like what's best for you, what's best for the business itself. And I think that's Sam's example, like the business is getting so big, maybe you don't have the skills to grow it. And actually selling it is good for the business. Someone else can grow it bigger. And then like what's best for your team, it's good to think about, the team that you have in place and what you do. Now, I shared this with someone and maybe I should get into this too. It's kind of like, what's my expertise in talking about this besides running Paid Memberships Pro? So in my history, I'm literally an investor geek. So one of my first online work projects was investorgeeks.com, and me and some friends studying investing, mostly in public markets, but also studying in private markets and talking with these fellows who are buying and selling businesses. We've also, along with Kim, I've run a few businesses and I've unsuccessfully sold 2 or 3 times. So I'll talk about those towards the end. It's like I failed to sell my business 3 times. So I have experience on the end of that. Mostly like we kind of decide to back out. And then, I've been involved in buying a stake in a business, and just we've, participated like I said, we've had customers who've bought and sold, and I've been thinking about this stuff. But anyway, in the past, there was a time when we were considering selling paid memberships pro. Not in reality, but when you'll notice if your business gets to a certain size, I don't know how you get on the list, but also there's kind of people in our industry that are aware, and people kept asking and giving us offers and stuff like that. So we said, hey, this is the 1 month when we're going to talk to everybody who's possibly interested in buying paid memberships pro. Give us your best offer. Let's figure out like if there's like something that's good for us, good for the business, and good for the team. Is there a deal that's there? And we eventually, kind of didn't follow up with. We kind of went further with like 4 or 5 different companies, and then we kind of like didn't follow up. And I'll talk a little bit about what that process is like if you're thinking about it. But we stopped it pretty short. Like at the end of the month, we were like, cool, we don't sell the business. Let's just keep building. But I shared this with someone, and they were like, Jason, actually, all you should think about is yourself. Like, what's best for you? And that, of course, is easy to say coming from the person who's giving me an offer to buy my business. He's like, just take the cash I'm giving you and forget about your business and forget about your team. But I don't think that way. And I know that a lot of owners, and especially owners who have kind of, mission-driven membership businesses, or, it's businesses that are adjacent to nonprofits and things like that. It's like you actually care about the business and your team perhaps more than yourself. So I think of it this way. So, but yeah, it is kind of like, so best for you. Are you going crazy and you just want to stop doing this? Is it like stressing out your marriage and your family? Do you not have any time? Are you just not interested anymore and you want something else to do? It's like, okay, think about, selling. Best for the business. Like you said, is it kind of growing too fast? Do you need help? Is it failing to grow and you feel like someone else might be able to do better? And then kind of best for the team. There's like these kind of acqui-hire type deals that are pretty common, especially on the lower end, where it's kind of like if this business isn't working out or is feeling kind of rough, these assets that we have are still valuable to some other business, including the team members that you have. And so it's kind of like helping your team land somewhere might be, so if people are kind of negotiating this business trade with that in mind. So that's what you think about, hey, when are we selling? And also kind of best for you, like if you hit your number, you're going to make, you want to make if you just want to sell the business, like you want to get it under your belt, you want to make some money up front. But I'm going to some of the metrics and stuff and might help you kind of think about if that's actually a good idea. So how to sell? You're like, hey, or like, who do I sell it to? I got to find someone who wants to buy my business. There are these sites online, especially on the lower end, that work pretty well. So like, there's like Biz Buy Sell. I heard the Buy Sell Empire is particularly good for, I think, for websites. And there's like acquire.com is like another one of these sites where people list and they buy and sell businesses. But probably best way to sell a business, and I think I'll focus kind of on the under $1 million size. I think over $1 million, it makes sense to find a broker in your industry. It makes sense to reach out to other folks, and you kind of get guided depending on your industry, like into a process. Although some of this still acquires to there, but some of the best situations would fall under like a strategic acquisition, and this is where maybe you're selling to a competitor or to like a complementary business. And I think it's good to sink in here and talk through like all the different examples, because maybe folks, when they think about selling their business, they're like, someone gives me cash and then they take over my business and run it exactly how it is. If you get creative, there's more valuable transactions. So for example, we had someone who works for us had a plugin that was free, I think. And it had like 10,000 people had used it. And there was like a number of, maybe, I don't know, it was like 100 people a month kind of signed up for it again, but it made $0. So it's kind of like, oh, how do you value this business in terms of revenue? They ended up selling it to someone who had a complementary business that sold to that same type of user type. And he's like, oh, I'd pay Facebook thousands of dollars in ads to get 100 leads per day or month. Like I want 100 leads. So I'm buying your business just to get leads of the same kind of person that's coming to your free membership. And so I think in a membership space, so for example, if you're running like a membership for nurses, and you have 1 million nurses and it's all free, or it's kind of slowly trickled down, like you're paying, some people are free and some are paid, but the paid's falling apart and you're not giving them value and you don't know what to do. You still have like a million nurses and their email addresses and contact to them, and probably like a sales funnel that talks to nurses and gains access to nurses. There's people who sell scrubs to nurses, other equipment, other training, other things, and they're like, hey, if I buy access to 1 million nurses and I get even 5% of them to buy my thing, that makes it worth a lot of money to me. So it's kind of like, if you're thinking just about, people who want to buy your business and run it exactly how it is, there's only so many of those. There's probably much more people who are even within the membership itself. So some of your biggest users maybe are motivated to keep it running. So it's good to reach out and look at people inside the community who are benefiting the most. I think you'll realize that if you're running a membership and if it's kind of like a training and content focused thing, some folks get more value than others, and you kind of you find those diehard customers who get a lot of value, or they're using it the best way to do biz dev or make use of it, and they maybe want to keep it running. So looking inside to your members, also looking inside to your team. Sometimes maybe there's someone who's in a management position who knows how to run the business and like they're interested in leveling up, or sometimes family or folks to look like, if it's a kind of a family business and someone who's been following along wants to run it. So those are kind of how you're finding who's going to sell your business and how to do it. We'll get into kind of the process a bit, but before that, we want to kind of talk about like valuations and metrics. Like one of the biggest aspects of selling the business, and maybe kind of the core piece that folks would want, has to do with, what's my business even worth? And so these are some metrics related to figuring out what the business is worth. So revenue obviously is like how much top line revenue do you make? So if you charge $100 for something and you have 1,000 members, you make $100,000 in revenue. EBITDA, this acronym stands for earnings before interest. What is the D? It's like, I always forget this. Hold on. It's like depreciation and amortization. So earnings before interest, depreciation, taxes, and amortization. But it's basically like, what's my profit after I pay for all the things, including taxes and complicated depreciation and appreciation type things. This one's useful because it's industry standard across all businesses of all sizes. People are interested in this kind of profit. That's what they're thinking of when they're thinking of profit. But there's another one here, and I'm not going to get into it too much. Like maybe we could share some content on this if people are interested, but you would do some research and also into like seller's discretionary income. And this is useful for like the smaller the business that's selling. And I'm kind of assuming I'm talking to more small businesses that maybe make less than $1 million. So if you make over $5 million, you're more likely to be talking about a valuation that's a multiple of revenue. Right? 5 million plus. If you're somewhere between, 1 million to 5 million, and this is like really just rule of thumb. In reality, you want to get all these numbers and they're kind of interested in all of them, but like the main one you'll talk about will probably be, your EBITDA, like was what people are interested in. And then if you're under $1 million in particular, people will be interested in like this seller's discretionary income. And what this means is that like this is the business that's really a job. So if you in non-membership space, it's something like running a Rita's Italian Ice stand, and probably the owner, if you only own one stand, is the manager themselves. And so part of the seller's discretionary income is that you also get that job. So you have to think, oh, like maybe I run a Rita's Italian Ice. I don't know what the real numbers on this, but if it makes like $500,000 a year, and then after I pay my staff and my own salary, I'm left with like $50,000 profit. That's your EBITDA is $50,000. But there's these other benefits to running a Rita's Italian Ice, like, and you can, or tax benefits, it's kind of like how much money does the owner make when they're running this business is kind of like the seller's discretionary income. And sometimes that number is higher or lower depending on like the nature of the business. But that's like a term that will come up. And in reality, sometimes it's used as like a way for these buyers are trying to get the smallest number possible. And then, so these are the top line numbers. You want to be able to find your revenue. You want to be able to find your EBITDA and your sales discretionary income. And there's tools to do that. And if folks are interested, let us know and we'll kind of find them and share them to the newsletter and stuff. Then there's multipliers. So like I said, the valuation of your business is some multiple of revenue or EBITDA or discretionary income. And that number, it varies widely. In general, the bigger the business, the bigger a multiple you can get. It's just kind of like you have access to investors with more money and longer time horizons. Like there's public stocks like Tesla and Palantir, and they're like, what does Palantir even do? I don't know, but that company trades at like 100 times sales. So it's like 100 times revenue. And something crazy like 1,000 times like their earnings or something. So that's crazy public companies like with worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It range of businesses are like under $1 million. A lot of times what you'll find is like 1 to 3 times like the profit, which is kind of tough to hear sometimes. So I don't know, like if you invest in the public market, like you're like, oh, like a good company, like 100 is crazy, but like a good company is worth like, 2 to 10 times sales. And you're like, I would like to get that. And you're kind of like, oh no, that's kind of like the top of the line for like a small business. Especially one with, we'll get into like the risk factors, but like key man risk where like the business, and this is very huge. This probably should be like one of the leading points. And what I'm talking about is like called key person risk or key man risk. In a membership business, a lot of times the membership is like a cult of personality around a single person who's running the membership. And there's a single person who either their personality, their brand, their content is so important to the membership that if they weren't there, it would be worth less money. Or even operationally, someone who's doing everything. Like it's kind of like there's no one who understands this space as much as I do. How do I, and like the rule of thumb, they'll say is like, do you have key person risk? Is if you were to go on vacation for a month and like not check in with your team at all, like would the business keep running or would it kind of fall off the wheels and fall apart? Or just be damaged, like less sales, less leads, less whatever, that you're doing in the business. So even just understanding that key person risk and addressing it will increase the value of your business. What was I talking about here? Oh, like multiples. Yeah. So some people it's like, especially if you have key person risk, it's tough to hear that I've been running a membership site for 5-10 years. And if I sell it, I make like 1 year's revenue or 1 year's profit, 2 years profit. That's kind of like the real reality of like smaller businesses that, are not as turnkey and not as easy to sell. And some of the stuff I get into. So if you're thinking that as you get into this, it's like, those are the challenges that you should address if you want to build something that you can sell. And so on top of like in that general range, figuring out where you fall, if the range for say $1 million business is like, something like 2 to 5 times profit, like where do you fall in that range? The way people who are acquiring companies will think about that is in terms of these metrics. So revenue growth percentage, and this is just literally year over year. How much has your revenue grown? And there's different rules of thumbs for different industries and different things. But basically, if you're growing really fast, it's going to look good to investors. They're going to expect the company to keep growing, or it gives them like a quote unquote margin of safety if they buy. If your revenue is growing slow, or heaven forbid, if you're losing money, and that might be like, this is why you want to sell, like the business isn't doing as good as it was before, and the business is doing worse than it was last year revenue wise. That looks really bad. People are going to give you less than 1 times multiple because they expect the business to keep, shrinking, unless they have some kind of strategic asset, which is something like we'll talk about, like, reason for buying the business, a different story. They're going to benefit in some other way, and if you can get them to think about the business that way, you're not going to get a good valuation if your company's losing money. I'm reading some of these comments. Okay, revenue retention. This is a fun one. So this is it's like a version of churn. It's related to churn, which people might know is like when people sign up, what percentage of your membership, cancels every month or every year. Revenue retention, and this might be the first one we do like a little bit of a exercise here. I wish everything was the same font. Okay. The way to calculate this is to take, you do it across a time frame. And I think for membership sites, it's important. I put this here, it's related to lifetime value as well. Like, make sure you calculate more than 1 year out. Like if you've been in business for a bunch of years, for 5 years, your business might be like ours. And I'll kind of like run out the scenario. Like in our business, like the first year, here's like our churn. And maybe I'll actually write it like retention, right? Or just use our user retention. So churn is the opposite of user retention, right? So hopefully I don't switch them around and make it too confusing. Churn is how many people leave. Retention is how many people stay. So in our first year, we have something like 50 to 60% of PM Pro users stay. And then, but then second year, like 70% of the people who are still left over stay. And then by the third year, 90% of those people stay. And by the fourth year, it's like 95% people stay. And just to make it easy, we'll just say 50%, right? So your membership might be like this, where there's kind of the first year, people kind of bounce off. Like, this isn't for me. I don't really need it. Or like in our, like if you have anything that's kind of business related, like half of all small businesses fail within a year or something like that, or people are trying something. And it's like, I think on our cancellation, reasons for canceling, it's like, hey, why are you canceling? Like, I'm not doing this thing anymore. This thing closed. And it's like, oh, okay. Maybe some of this content could be useful to send to those folks. Hey, you're closing. Did you think about selling? Or a lot of times, they didn't even get off the ground. So it's kind of like you can't do anything about it. So you're going to have high churn the first year, low retention. But then after that, it's people are more likely to stick around. And there's some products like this that are sticky. There's other products that are kind of a little bit different, where it's kind of like here's like another scenario would be like 70%. It's like you're just always constantly losing 30% of your members every year. And I think this is year to year. So if you kind of modeled that, it would be like 7 times. So yeah. Another times here. How many, if you wanted to say how many remain, then this equals 0.7 times 0.7 times 0.7. So how do we calculate kind of like revenue retention? So if you're calculating revenue retention over the past year, you start the year with 100 members, and how much revenue do they make? And then at the end of the year, when the following year starts, there's half of them remain, and times what are they paying? And so you would have 50% revenue retention if you look at it just a year. But then you could do the math out. Hey, 4 years ago, we had this many members. Then 4 years later, how many do we have? And what percentage of that revenue is around? And it should be a number that's higher than 50%. So if the buyer is going to be like, hey, yeah, it's only 50%. And you say, yeah, well, that's for the last year. But if you look at it over, try to get as wide a time frame as you can, the 5-year blended average, and that number is going to be higher. Of all the recurring people last year, including people who've been here for 5 years, how many of them are going to pay me next year? The other thing to think about revenue retention is so we've been talking about user retention, but actually it's revenue retention. So it's how much money are you making from those users from a year ago? So I'm going to write out another scenario, which is this is similar, like the Paid Merchants Pro has like a 50% intro discount on the first year. So our user retention in the first year is 50%, but our revenue retention is actually 100% or more. And so if you have, I'll kind of do the math. So if we have how many users 1 year ago, right? And then we're like, how many users 1 year later? Or let's say like, what did they price paid? And then users 1 year later or today, price paid. And then, like, so if we had say 1,000 users and they paid $300, actually, let's do the math. It's gonna be the same, right? So it's the revenue. These are all dollars. All right, so we made $300,000 on the. This is a hypothetical scenario. We made $300,000 on all the users who signed up a year ago. 1,000 users. Actually, it's not money. 1,000 users paid $300. That's $300,000. Now our user retention is 50%, right? So how many users do we have a year later? You have half that. That'll work. That's the normal number. But they're paying $600 because it's a 50% intro discount. They actually pay $600. So then if you calculate the revenue on that, it's still $300,000, right? You have half as many people paying twice as much. So our revenue retention is 100,000 or 100%. And someone buying your business would love to see that. They're like, because they realize things are going to change. You might leave eventually. They're like, well, how much money I'm going to make from your existing users? And if you have slow churn, they just expect that number to go down. But if your revenue retention is 100%, they can expect that to continue. Like that's how it's happened in the past. Now, this number actually can be higher than 100% because if you're set up like PayMentorship Pro, you have levels of plans. You also have what's called expansion revenue. And so you have, some of these people maybe signed up for the $300 plan, but they actually upgrade to, and they're going to pay $600 if they don't do anything, but maybe they're going to upgrade to $1,000 a year plan, or the numbers work out some other way. And so, if you have expansion revenue in your business and you include that, you can actually have more than 100% revenue retention. And then people love to see that. And actually just thinking about this is useful. This is kind of part of the reason we move towards that intro pricing model is if you charge less upfront, you'll get more people. And so basically in our business, I don't know if we kind of like, what's the least expensive product, pricing we can use. We get as many people as possible on, because half of them, it doesn't work out. When it does, our product is really useful and they want to keep it. We're very sticky in the follow-up years. If that's the case for your membership as well, it's kind of like make it cheap early and then, have other stuff for them to kind of raise their prices into. I think this also is a good point for me to segue. Like one of the questions that was on my mind comes up a lot, and maybe it's on people's mind watching this, is why doesn't Paid Memberships Pro just calculate these numbers for me automatically? Wouldn't that be awesome if we had better reporting that did this? And there's really two reasons that we don't. One is these things are complicated to figure out, and they're very specific to the business that's being run. So, if you have free users, if you have different plans, if your old plan is like for a special case, but your new plan, you have discount codes. There's like a lot of little bits and pieces that are probably in your brain and seem obvious, but for the software is very literal. It like can't figure out. It can guess, and there's tools out there that will guess these numbers. And if you use only Stripe, they have pretty good reporting that will give you similar numbers. But as I dig into these, there's lots of assumptions that are based on the specific business, and we could program like a questionnaire or a settings page to help you get to it, but it would be difficult, right? So it's not just kind of like, just put a thing on the screen and write one math formula and it figures out all these things for me. But the second more important part is, and this is like, I don't know, like it's like preaching, and Sam knows this from being on the team, there's more value in calculating these numbers than there is in seeing what the number is. So if you like going through this exercise of figuring out like what is your revenue retention, and then kind of realizing, oh, my retention is different year to year based on the cohort, where like my retention was really low one year and really high the next year, but like, why was that? I wonder. Oh, we did this one thing differently this year than that year. Or kind of like, I'm an advocate of this, like thinking through spreadsheets, and I realize it's like that's how my brain is wired, and some people have the opposite brain that like hates spreadsheets. But like it's like the hands-on experience, whatever it is. Maybe write it out on paper, and pen and paper is a really good way to remember too, or like slide around Post-it notes and things like that. But like forcing yourself to go through the exercise of calculating these will give you insights into your business and be like, oh, and if you're kind of upset with the number, you're like, oh, that's what, like, that's an opportunity. You're like, oh, well, how can, if I improve revenue retention, my business is going to be worth a lot more.
And if you are using a spreadsheet to track it, adding a comment to that cell about like, why that number may have been low or what you changed or, different aspects like that is really helpful when you do go back and look.
Yeah. See, someone has a question about foreign ownership roles, which is tricky.
Yeah, there is a legal side to selling your business as well that I don't know how much you're going to get into the legal side of it other than.
We talk a little bit about like deal types, which touches on it. And that's just, I would open it up that there's very different ways of buying and selling a business, including if you're selling an overseas business and they need like a US stockholder. That gets kind of like, you got to get creative. All right, let's go back to metrics a little bit. Okay, so revenue retention, we kind of dove into that. It's when users sign up, how much money do you make from them in following years? Of all your, and if you've been running for a long time, how many of your existing members are going to still be around next year? And you got to have a really good story and clear. You got to get these numbers and do them clear to folks. The EBITDA margin, so that EBITDA is like your profit after you take out all the expenses and add back in maybe some appreciation and stuff. How much profit did the business get this month? It's the margin is just that as a ratio. So if you had $200,000 profit on $1 million in revenue, your profit margin is 20%. And this number is important. Like a bigger profit margin is better. Like a business with a bigger profit margin is going to have a higher multiple. Not only will it just make it's the base number if you're being valued on EBITDA or profit margin, like it's just a bigger number in general, but the bigger the margin, it's kind of like padding for anything the person buying might want to do. It helps, and there's kind of cutoffs, and it's also industry dependent. If you're in this software membership space, it's expected that your margins are really high. It's kind of like, what are the input costs to, kind of just allowing people into a Slack channel type thing. How much does it cost? Your margins should be relatively high. People will expect that. The other thing about high margins is that, and you have to be realistic if there's like the owner's salary component. So that, it's like, assume that they're going to have to hire someone, at market rates for the work that you do in the business if you're planning to leave when you sell. And the other thing about margin as we get into like deal types is if your margin is high enough, the buyer can take a loan and just pay you back out of the profits. And so if, say you have 80% margin on the business, someone can take, there's like small business association loans in the United States, but people can take loans from various places, buy your business, maybe use 20% of the profits to pay back the loan. And then the 60% of the profits, they still have, and they can actually then just pay you some of the profit margin. We'll get into deal types later. Like a lot, you might be thinking when they buy my business, I get cash up front, and that's one option, but there's lots of options where you get some cash up front, but then also you get cash follow on like year to year. And of course there's always a risk. Like what if this person can't pay me back? But there's also benefits to that in that, you're getting a lump sum, a smaller lump sum over a longer period of time. So there's like tax benefits to having, it's not as big a number that's being taxed every year. And maybe it's just kind of nice for you. And sometimes you can build in, hey, if the business does really, really well, that number actually goes up. Lifetime value is one that we talk about. And actually this is one people ask us to calculate for them, but that's basically like how much money do you make when someone buys for $300, but then 50% of them pay me $600 a year later. If I'm thinking about those 2 years, I actually make $600 per person. That's the lifetime value I get from every member. And I'll try to go slow on that, right? So in this case where, so it's like lifetime value, in year one, so let me put it this way. Year one, you make $300 off everybody. And then year two, you make $600 off half the people. So you make another $300 per person. So that if you calculate lifetime value out 2 years, it's $600. But then year three, you make people are paying $600. And then there's 50% times 70% people left. So that's another $210. And then year four. Now there's kind of mathematical formulas to do this, and they're all like Shopify has a post I've shared with the team, and it gets like the lambda calculus, I think, of like how it's like it looks like not like one of the most gnarly things I took a lot of math classes in college, and how I have like, PTSD flashbacks to that. But there's kind of people have simple ones that this is another one. There's lots of simple ways to calculate this, and it's like it maybe doesn't work. It doesn't really take into account that like your churn might be different year to year. There's a deer outside my office. I'm going to turn my camera on for you. But all right, year four. That's $600 times 0.5 times 0.7 times 0.9. So that's another one. So then if you calculate it out 4 years, your lifetime value is like 1,000. And then actually you can calculate, I usually stop around 5. Sometimes I say if you have these really sticky customers that just don't leave, and this isn't like it's crazy. Like I think people that when you're talking to someone I'll get into this too. Like how do you during the negotiation, you want to be careful about what you're focused on and how you're talking to the people. You have to put yourself in their mindset. Like they're kind of like 5 years from now. Like how is that part of the lifetime? Like they start to phase out. But if you have like we have successful membership businesses that will be around forever, basically. And as long as we continue to make a product that, serves them well, like it's hard to transition, so it's tough. We also there's lots of membership and associations that we've worked with where it's like a professional association. And it's like, if I keep using the nurse example, it's really good, but it's kind of like, I'm a nurse in Pennsylvania. I'm in like I'm sure that I forget exactly what it's called. I'm sure there's one like a nurses association in Pennsylvania. Like you live your whole life and work as a nurse for 30 years. Like and that association serves you well. Like there are people who will be in that for 30 years. And so it's like, but of course someone buying your business is like, like, let's not think that far ahead. But if you go like maybe 4 or 5 years out and you're like, hey, my lifetime value is $1,000. So for every customer I get, $300 this year, but over the next 4 years, on average, I get $700 from them. And if you have a monthly membership, so the ingredients to this are like your retention rate, month over month, year over year, and the kind of average revenue that you get from that person in that year, which could go up or down, depending on the nature of your pricing and stuff. But this is another good one to like actually do the math, like you learn some stuff. All right. CAC here is like cost of customer acquisition, cost of acquisition, cost to acquire a customer, CAC.
Customer acquisition cost.
Customer acquisition cost. Yeah. Okay. I'm like, what's like specific customer acquisition cost? And so this is if this is most often referred to like when you're doing paid ads. So it's like I have a Google AdWords budget and it's like $1,000 a month. And it, every time someone clicks, it's like $1.50, but only 10% of people who click sign up. So my customer acquisition cost within the context of those ads is, $15. So for every $15 they spend, I get like a paying customer. But especially if you're selling the business, like it's good to have that number in the context of doing your ads to think about. But basically, the easier way to calculate it for overall your business is you take your total marketing budget, like, go through all your expenses, who are your marketing people, that those ads expenses are definitely marketing. If you consider going to a conference, marketing, those expenses, what percentage of like, if you have kind of, the owners do marketing and product and content, when you think about content, is your content marketing content or kind of like the content you're selling for a membership site? Like Some of our content we think of as product, and some of our content we think of as marketing. And sometimes it overlaps because it's kind of like give your best stuff out front, you know. But basically take your total marketing budget and divide it by how many people you sold to that year. So if your marketing budget was $150,000, it's like CAC, if you're like marketing budget is $150,000 and you got 1,000 members last year, then it's kind of like your customer acquisition cost is going to be your budget divided by your members. So $150. It's costing $150 to make $300. What's that?
Ouch.
That's a lot of money. And there's different like thoughts on like where this number should be. Like a good place to be is if it's 2 to 1 like this. It's kind of like if so, because you can see how this runs. Like, so I spend $150, then I make $300. Then I take that $300 and I spend it again twice to get 2 more customers. I make $600, and that becomes kind of like that like grain of sand on the checkerboard. So like I use $150, I make $300. Then I use that $300 to make 2 more sales. Those 2 sales were $600. Then I use that. And so if you have this 2 to 1 ratio, you can kind of reinvest your marketing budget in theory, like easier said than done, to grow. But that's kind of like if you look at the customer acquisition cost to how much you make year 1. But if you look at the lifetime value, and you know, if you have a long time horizon, you're like, for $150, I make $1,000. Like that's a pretty good ratio. In our example, our LTV to CAC is going to be I'm going to add $1. I know it's 99, so I'm going to add $1 so the math comes up good. Divided by the cost of acquisition. No, that's not right. What happened here? Did I do this? I should be $1,000. Oh, I did this wrong. This way. Oops. Sorry. I have my parentheses wrong. Okay. And this is not $1, but just a number. But it's a ratio. Oh, maybe we went. So, sorry. I took the sum of the money I'm going to make over 4 years from on average from folks. I added 1 because I knew it would make the math better, but maybe I didn't have to, because it's kind of a $9.99 divided by $150. So it costs $150 to make almost $1,000. So I'm getting 6.66 times return on my money. That's kind of like the way to look at it. And different buyers will want higher or lower numbers for this. So if you're over 10 or over 12 or something like that, this is like, it just kind of shows that you could be marketing more. But this is kind of like a common thing. If you build like a grassroots effort and someone who really knows how to do marketing could buy your business and run it better, they'll be looking at this customer acquisition lifetime value costs, and they want like a highest ratio as possible, because that means like, oh, there's slack in the budget for me to spend it on marketing and make more money. If not, then maybe you got to tweak some of these numbers to make it more appealing. Okay, so I spent a lot of time on that stuff. We can go to kind of some risk subtractor. So what kinds of things like hinder your valuation multiple? And this list comes directly from Alex Ramosi. We were at like his scaling workshop recently, and I've been consuming his content, and he has a good risk or list of these risk factors. And it's kind of as good as any. There's other stuff that's not listed here, but these are like the really important ones, I think, for businesses of this size. But the most important one in these membership businesses, we already talked about, like I said, it could be like the key slide is like key man risk, key person risk, is it just means that, you know, again, that there's one person, maybe probably you as the owner, that is really important. Or sometimes it's, you know, the talent, that's important, like builds the content, writes the content, wrote the books, did the courses, shows up to the sessions that the membership is involved in. Excuse me. And so if this one's really important, it's like, and I think Ormosi has like, numbers for these things, and every investor, I've seen other versions of this from kind of like there's like a business value accelerator and some of the incubator things I looked at, but it kind of, in general, you want to, it's hard to sell the business if you don't fix this. If you don't fix this and you're selling a business, you're really selling an email list, you're selling like a brand, you're selling like a funnel potentially, but it's like all broken. Like if you leave and it falls apart, you kind of can't sell the business. So you have to figure this one out. Some people kind of, it's like, you got to lean, it depends on the business. It's like, it's not realistic that someone else could do what you're doing. Like, you're like a very unique person. The way that you built your membership is by being like an awesome, person that has great content and executes and has a brand and gets out there and build an audience. And it's really hard to like hand that off to a successor. Like hasn't really been done that often. At the same time, if you kind of have the kind of membership business that just caters to an audience, like it's less about you, it's more about the domain you're in. So like, again, like that nurses association type business, professional association, like you don't have to necessarily be the one who's building the content, that's helping the nurses, or you're giving them access to each other, or there's kind of probably other key experts in the field that you bring in. But this is a big one to think about. So there could be like a whole talk about this, kind of like, how do I exit my business without exiting the business? And it really depends on what you're doing. So then there's key client risk. So most, I think, of the membership sites that we'll be using ours fall under like, there's a lot of people paying a smaller amount. I think that's the typical setup for most membership sites. There are quite a few though, where it's like, maybe you sell a membership for, it could be Nurses Association in Pennsylvania, but I bet there's one hospital network that most nurses, part of like Penn State Health. I don't know the exact numbers, but say like, so you could have another, so sometimes it's not literally like the members, but like there's a single entity that if they change their mind about something, your business will be at risk. So it's like, if you have 10,000 nurses, but 8,000 of them are at Penn State hospitals, and Penn State Hospital decides to build their own network or kind of encourage their nurses to go to a different network, you could lose like quite a bit of your revenue overnight. And so that's the thing, like people buying a business won't like, if a lot of your customers have an attachment or came in through a specific like affiliate or a specific domain, or you can think of it as channel. Like another one is like single channel risk. So channel could be something like a big affiliate, like the hospital is a channel. Like the hospital gives all their new nurses like a flyer that tells them to come to our website. That's like a channel, but a channel could also be Facebook ads, Google ads, organic search, direct mail, all the different ways you get access to your leads. And some are better than others, but in general, it's like, if you're, someone who's buying the business, they'll want to see that you're like, if your whole business is based on Facebook ads, it's a risk to them that like, if Facebook changes their algorithm, or they don't know how to run Facebook ads as well as you do, that like your kind of business falls apart. So that's something you want to look into, and kind of like addressing these things, make it better. There's like market risk is just, what's the market you're in? If, you train programmers and everyone thinks programmers are going to lose their job, is that kind of like a market risk? You're like, hey, I don't want a site that trains programmers when everyone's using AI to get it done, something like that. So there's kind of like these bigger economic factors. And then data risk is kind of all these numbers we're going into. This is one of the most important things you can do, like when you start talking to folks about this, is to do the homework and run the numbers yourself and have them available, and be able to speak to them with confidence and have your stories like, hey, if this number is low, why is it low? If this number is high, what's your justification for how high it is? People kind of don't believe you. If you're like, we have more than 100%, revenue retention, and they're like, that's impossible. And you're like, maybe they just don't think it's possible, or they just, they're fine, but you're like, oh no, like here's exactly why, because we have intro pricing, and then plus we have upsells, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. But data risk also, like, it was described as like people don't trust your Google Sheets. So if your business, they trust QuickBooks and HubSpot. So it's like an encouragement to move your numbers into, which I would hate to do that. Like if you're just before you're selling your business, but it's kind of like people are going to trust the numbers if they come in like a familiar format to them, especially if you're selling to a bigger organization. They're like, oh, I can just plug you right into QuickBooks. So yeah, I'm looking at some of the questions here.
There's a question in the comments of, do you see many people split the membership business into smaller business?
Yeah, that's interesting. Which is maybe a good, no, I could just talk about it now. I forget like where segue, but I did want to talk about something like this, like around like the assets that your business has. So I talked a little bit before, like the idea, it is kind of deal type. So you're like, hey, someone gives me cash up front to run my business exactly how it runs now, is like one scenario that isn't always like the best or like the most likely scenario when you're selling. It was like, if you think about the assets that you have and who they're valuable to, and this is where like running on something like Paid Memberships Pro, where you have email addresses and people logging into your site, these are like, those users are more valuable than if you were using a hosted service that maybe you have access to emails, but you have to export them and you have to trust that that service will give them to you. Like if you've been running, on a platform and or if you have, customizations into the platform, they might be interesting to folks who want to do similar things. We've seen people who like if you have built really good technology and skills and kind of marketing funnels that work in one domain and you think it could work in another domain. So sometimes people would like buy the process. They're like, oh, you sold to nurses. I think I can sell the same thing to doctors or something like over here, or nurses in Pennsylvania. I think I can sell to nurses in Texas. And so you see people split that. And a lot of times I think some of these membership businesses have like free content, books, memberships, services, and coaching. And so you can see splitting up the business, giving your coaching to these folks, giving your, the other businesses to someone else. And kind of like one of the like common patterns there is like selling leads to someone. So I brought up the example of someone on the team selling a plugin that it wasn't valuable for the revenue it made. It didn't make any revenue. It was valuable as a lead generation for this other. And so if you can kind of think about outside the box that way, you're like, oh, someone wants to sell to these, you kind of can sell the leads to someone. So yeah, there were some ways that I've seen people like kind of split the business, in smaller businesses. But yeah, talking about different deal types. So this also so cash up front is, I think, what everyone kind of commonly thinks about. I have a business, it makes $200,000 a year profit. I'm going to shoot for 3 times profit. I could sell it for $600,000. Give me $600,000, and then I go. And actually, at that scale, it's kind of more common to be built that way. But you still could find someone who will get like a small business association loan, give you some of that money down, and then have a contract to pay you. So maybe give you $300,000 down and then have a contract to pay you $100,000 over the next 3 years. And that way you get your $600,000, but it gets spread out. And at a different scale, you see that even more common in the kind of 1 to 10 million scale, where they'll give you, if you just put a zero at the end, it was like, hey, $3 million now, and then $1 million a year over the next 3 years. It's beneficial to you because you pay less taxes on those follow-up payments. So if you got a $5 million tax or $6 million at once, you pay a higher tax bill than if you had it split up over time. You could go crazy trying to guess, and this is like United States focus, but there's similar things all over the place. Oh, but what if this person comes in and lowers to whatever tax, and so you could kind of go crazy trying to like time politicians, but that doesn't seem like a winning formula. So sometimes it's like, hey, I'd rather just take the money I know. But you kind of open yourself up. There's lots of buyers who don't have the cash on hand, or they'd rather structure it this way because they're paying you out of profits, and a lot of times. So they, like I said, they take a loan and then they use the profits from the business to pay back the loan, and then they can also pay you on top of, a portion of the profit. And there's more people willing to do that than there are people who just have money sitting around to buy your business and give you cash up front. And then revenue and profit share. And sometimes if you're kind of still involved, which might be the case, like you're like, hey, I just don't want to run the business, but I'll keep making the videos. I'll keep showing up to the meetings. You could kind of like have someone else running the business and then still have a revenue profit share, or have like these, performance metrics built in. Like if they grow the business, then you get a bigger piece of it. If the business like falls apart for some reason, you get less. And there's different versions of these, and it's kind of like, of course, the buyer wants to give as little as possible, and there's lots of kind of horror stories. I've heard of folks who, it's weird. Like they sell because they think their business is booming and it's like growing really fast and they can't handle it. Then they sell to this big company, and the big company doesn't actually do any better. So like, oh yeah, with our resources, we'll be able to do even better. And then like either the business founders or they don't, and they don't hit those metrics. They're like, oh, if like the revenue doubles, then you'll get a bonus, and you stick around and maybe you get a paycheck and you try to help it double. But really, like the bureaucracy of the big business means that they just don't get around to doing that. And so in general, you like, hey, the money you get up front is kind of better. Like you want to fade those bonuses a lot of times. Like I said, but it's good to have them written in there just in case, like if something, they hit the lottery, or especially if there's like lots of new initiatives. You're like, hey, I haven't done this yet, but if we launch this plan on top of it, we sell this premium thing to our existing users, it should be worth money. Like you could try to negotiate some of the upside, but of course you're always going to give up some. But I think be flexible. Like I said, like I think the way to think about this is in terms of, you take what you need. Like if you can, feel free to like, hey, these are my terms, but don't be surprised that people ask these things. It's not unusual. That's kind of what I want to say. Is like these things are kind of more common, I think, than not. And different buyers have different forms of this, but just try to work with them to make a good deal. And you gotta be ready to kind of do this math, which kind of gets me to process a little bit. And I guess this is something to be ready for. Is like, hey, you're thinking about selling, you start talking to people, you realize you have to like figure out a lot of metrics that you don't have exactly. So you do that your own kind of internal due diligence. But you have negotiations, you're talking to people. There's a step where you have like a letter of intent. So a letter of intent is really just you're writing down on paper with a potential acquirer, like, hey, like the rough outline of what the deal would be. And it's usually the form like the buyer intends to buy business for about $4 million, roughly structured this way. It includes these assets. And so, for example, if you're trying to buy PayMemberships Pro, it's like, are you buying PayMemberships Pro or Stranger Studios? If you buy PayMemberships Pro, are the owners going to stick around or not? I don't know. Or are you buying all of it? Do you get like the Stripe revenue and the memberships? What about the book revenue? Like all these, these things are included. These things aren't included. It's kind of like, so it helps to kind of start, like kind of, here's the set point for the negotiations. And it's not binding. It's not like, it's kind of, it doesn't mean you have to sell. It usually, when you sign a letter of intent, hey, you're not going to talk to anyone else anymore. So it's kind of like, if you're looking at a bunch of different buyers, this step, you're like, hey, I'm going to go steady with this one company and see if they're going to buy me. And then that starts like the due diligence. Well, they'll start asking for other, the buyer will often send you like, I want to know all this stuff. They'll want access to your QuickBooks, to your different things to kind of verify all the numbers that you gave them. It's kind of, and this could drag on and different buyers are different. Some are very motivated to buy quickly. In general, the quicker you buy, like, they're going to give you like a rougher, a lower multiple. But sometimes a strategic buyer, like, I know your business, I know exactly what I'm going to do with those leads, I know how I'm going to do this thing. So they might be motivated to be quick, but also give you like a good deal. But this could take so the horror stories here are people kind of like get really excited. They sign a letter of intent. There's maybe like a big number implied there. You're going to buy my $1 million revenue business for 5 times revenue for some reason, $5 million. You start to spend your money. Then you spend a year like working with them to strategy what they're going to do after they buy, talking to their lawyers, figuring out numbers you're going to do, showing them the books. And it's like, you take your eye off the ball of your business and you're just worried about selling it. And then they talk you down from like, I mean, you should always think of the letter intent as like when you're selling as the high bar, and they're just going to try to whittle you down. And it's kind of like, okay, well, I thought 5, but we're worried about, and I mean, I don't know. I've heard about it so many times. It's like these subtractors. They cut like before the letter of intent, they're like, yeah, whatever. I think it's fine. And then after oftentimes it's someone different. So you talk to this kind of person at the business who's like, oh, cool. It'd be nice if we brought your membership into our business. We'd be able to use it for marketing, do this with it. Cool. All right. Then letter of intent. Now the real business folks, the lawyers and acquisition people have to get involved. But they say, what about key man risk? What about key client risk? What about channel risk and market risk and data risk? And then they're like, well, we said we'd give you 5 times, but actually 4, 3, 2. And then you're like, wait, I thought I was going to make $5 million. I'm only going to make $2 million. And it's like you're stressed out, and your business maybe is like not doing as well because you took your eye off the ball. Like, so anyway, it's kind of like before you get into the process, you kind of want to prepare for the worst in that sense. Yeah, it could be rough.
Before you jump into your tips, just because we're at the top of the hour, I can totally go as long as you want to go for. That's fine. But while we have the audience, I do just want to shout out if this video is helpful for you or you like the content, give us a like, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And then we also have, we do have more events coming up. The next one is actually going to be Coding with Sam next Friday at 9 a.m., June 6th. And then to find out what I will be coding, if you go to our Slack channel and join the Slack community, that you will find out on June 5th what I will be presenting on June 6th. That is one of the benefits to being in the community. And then our next open office hours is, I don't remember. Yeah, if you could, it'll be up on the, yeah, right there.
June 12th? Smash your membership site.
Another smash your membership site. So after this live event, the live page that Jason's looking at right now will be updated where you can submit your URL to your Paid Memberships Pro site, and Kim will give constructive feedback, what you're doing really great, what could be improved on your site live.
Sweet. Love that. Smash that like
scheduled programming.
Yeah. Videos, when you hit like and subscribe, it lets us know that this content was useful, and the more likes and subscribers that we have, like the easier it is for us to kind of do really cool cross promotional things. So we appreciate it. All right. So I was going to end with some tips from when I was, like I said, I was in this process on the selling end like 3 times, and we never sold. And one time in particular, I'm thinking of like before Paid Memberships Pro was even a thing. Kim and I had a company, winelog.net, and it was like a social network for wine drinkers, and it was pretty popular. I forget like the monthly, like we had something like 50,000 monthly active users or something like that. And people would come to the site, find wine, and then we tried to build businesses on top of that. We learned at that point, hey, if you're not helping them make money, if you're not involved in the money transaction, it's harder to build a business, because we kept partnering with companies that did do that, and then like the partners would fall through. That's a different story. But it was like it was kind of a tough time for us, and there was I don't know, I guess we can say now like 1-800-Flowers had like wine websites as well, and they wanted to buy WineLog. And in that process, like it was like exciting. That's a huge company. 1-800, I don't know, even at the time, hundreds of millions of dollars, big company, tons of people. It's like just Kim and I. It's like, oh, y'all have like dozens of people working in your wine department. And there was like a very obvious business model. We'd had 50,000 users every month were coming, most of them looking to buy wine, and we tracked it. Something like 2,000 of them would click off our website with the intent to go buy wine. And we were really trying to figure out how to monetize those people on our website that wanted to actually buy the wine. And we're like, oh, duh, what if we just send that traffic to, 1-800-Wines or whatever, I forget what their wine businesses were called. And so that's, that's where we're going to them. We were like, hey, Dude, like if we sent you 2,000 visitors and you could get 10% of them to buy, that's like 200 orders. Like, what's your average order value? People buy, is it like, I'm going to guess it's like $300. So it's like 200 times 300. It's like $6,000 a month, plus here's all these things we could do to grow it. So when they reached out to us, we were like, oh, like I was thinking ahead, here's how we could build the business together. That would be, hey, if we come together, what's the cool thing we could build? I was thinking about, best for the business. I was like, for both. I was like, hey, this is good for both our businesses. It's like a thing we could do. But what I realized was that that's not how they were thinking about the acquisition. They were like, I could care less about those leads. Our people are already getting leads from where they're going. I could care less about building like this thing. I kind of just want to buy two smart people that know how to build technology in the wine space and kind of bring them onto our team. And we could give you jobs and we could give you like a little bit of money for your kind of cute little business that you have. And so they kind of lowballed us on the business side. I forget what it was, maybe like $100,000 for the business. But then they're like, hey, we'll give you and Kim like really good jobs. Luckily we didn't do that because like Kim and I then went on to build Big Nurse's Prep instead of like going out to Napa Valley to work in the wine industry. So it's like, so some of the things that came out here. So one thing came out, so during the due diligence, and this also happened to a lesser extent, I was serious about selling, but we were kind of like entertaining the idea with folks, and it forced us to look at all the numbers and kind of think about how would this, what's the optimal version of this business to get the biggest amount of money. It's kind of like, hey, if I can make more revenue, if I can make more profit, seller's discretionary income, if I can do all these things better, the business is worth more. If I can address these risks, the business will be worth more. So I kind of put it in our head, and then we got excited about the business again. We're like, so it's kind of like, you might be stressed out and willing to sell, and then you do the due diligence and like theory crafting. It often gets you excited about the business. And even the wine log, it didn't work out for us, but when we realized like, oh, if we send our traffic to companies selling wine and monetized it, that's like $1 million a year business. Like, why are we just giving it to someone for $100,000? We tried to build that business. It fell through, but we got excited. So we were like, we don't want to sell. We want to build this thing. So don't be surprised if that happens. If you're kind of like doing this process, you change your mind. And I think that's like a good outcome. Unless, I mean, if it didn't work out for us, we could be like, man, we could have had like $100,000 and like these really nice cushy jobs. We could have lived in like beautiful Napa Valley. But it's like creative compensation, like be open to creative compensation. Like it wasn't right for us, Kim and I at the time, but it might be right for you. It's kind of like, I was annoyed at that time that the people I was talking to weren't willing to like talk about how we actually would work post-acquisition. Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to build together? Like, I was interested in that. They weren't. And then I think it's funny, that company was doing multiple millions of dollars of budgets. We were kind of handed off to a division that wasn't really like acquisitions. They didn't really have the acquisition money to play with. They had compensation money to play with. Like, so it's kind of like, there's like those phrases, like if you're on the phone with someone and like your phone bill, you want to lower your phone bill or you want to get a refund for something, they would say like, you ask the person like, what can you do for me? It's some kind of phrasing like that, because you're like, you can be like, hey, can you give me a refund? No, I'm sorry, we can't do it. And then if you say, what can you do for me? Then they're like, okay, those are like these magic words that like, I'm not able to refund. I do have like 100% off coupon that I'm allowed to give, but only in special circumstances. So it's a little bit that way. It's like at this, we were sent to a bigger company. It wasn't a big enough scale to actually go into the normal acquisition process and get like access to the cash they were using to buy businesses. It was more of an acqui-hire. And they were like, hey, this is like we can give you the highest possible salaries. We can give you up to $100,000 as a bonus, basically, for buying your business. Like, that's kind of the deal on the table. And it wasn't the right deal for us, but maybe it's the right deal for you. And then the other thing I kind of realized, so it's kind of similar to like, figure out what the decision maker on the other side of the negotiation needs to win. So it's a little bit kind of the other cases when we were thinking about, entertaining selling. And even in that 1-800-Flowers one, it's kind of like, I can sense the person, it was like, he wanted a good deal. Like he could buy a business on the cheap. It was like, he didn't want the idea of what was happening. It was just like, look at this like distressed assets we bought. The distressed asset we bought. Like, and that's actually bad. You probably don't want to be in that situation where like you're selling a distressed asset and it's like, It doesn't feel good. You're probably not going to feel good. I'll get out of it, and that's all I wanted was to get out of this. But it's kind of like not a position of strength for you. But for example, so this is in theory. You're selling to a larger company, and you're kind of like all these different things could be important, but revenue or profit, But the person, so I wrote like, how is the person who's making the decision, like, what is their bonus calculated on? So if their bonus is calculated on revenue, they're going to be excited to buy a business with more revenue. If their bonus is calculated on profit, they're going to be excited to buy a business with more profit. Their bonus might be, or maybe the business is like, I've seen this before, that kind of like, they want engineers. Like it was hard to buy engineers, and they're like, oh, you guys build stuff. How many software coders do you have? And that's again where they're like, yeah, on a smaller scale, it's like, all right, we can try to buy your business, but really we just like, this could save us money hiring marketers or software people or people in the industry or content. We see that a lot of like kind of big blog networks buy membership sites and content. They're kind of like, I'm just buying your traffic. So it's kind of like, and sometimes it feels bad because you might be like, hey, what can we do together? What can we build together? How I'm focused on my numbers in my business to look good. Obviously, that's why they look good, because I've been focused on them for the past 5 years. But like, what numbers are they focused on? And like, sometimes you can like behind the scenes be like, how is their bonus calculated? Oh, like on revenue, like, and outside of fraud, there are things you can, because this is like a year-long process. There are things you can do to like boost your revenue, boost your profit, boost like definitely some of the other metrics, and ways to talk about them. So sometimes it's literally like a number, and sometimes it's a feeling. Like they have to feel like you just get the sense on the other side of the negotiating table, you're looking for a win-win, but they're like trying to, they have to feel like they took advantage of you. It's really weird, but like I think it's honest. Like some of these folks I work with, like they want to feel like they're getting a deal, and so you kind of have to sell them a story. And if you can do some creative thinking around that, of like, oh, like this is the way, whichever of your numbers is kind of best, frame it up of like, yeah, I don't know. It's free users. You have 100,000 of them. So you're kind of like, you have more free users than paying users. And they have some way of thinking about leads and free users and what they cost. And it's like, oh, what do you pay for a free user? A lead X. Be like, oh, I got 100,000 of them. I'll sell them to you for, $5 a piece instead of $10 a piece. That might be like a bigger number than focused on revenue. And so if you can kind of talk their language, it'll be good. But take that with a grain of salt. This is like kind of, my tips from not successfully selling. I think the people who successfully sold, in every case, like we backed out. But yeah, any questions kind of come in?
No, the only thing that was added was that someone's seen the no development from many companies that are just buying up competitors.
So I mean, like they're not building on top of it. They're just kind of
there's like acquiring
the competitors
to get the competitor off of the market.
Yeah. That's a bummer. And that's where it's like, I don't know. I would feel that way about pay per spread. Like if I sold it to someone who didn't run it the way that I wanted to. And lots of folks probably feel that way about their membership site. Like I said, a lot of these are mission driven, and you're like, you're going to buy it to run into the ground. That's sad. And like, it's kind of branded. It's a key person risk, like goes both ways. It's kind of like the business isn't that much without your brand. Like, oh, what are you without the business if you've been tied to it for a while? So it's really tough if you're on the end of that. But, but it's I don't know, it's the nature. Like if there are competitors that address the same thing, that's kind of, there may be, that it's a good place to go. Like your competitors, whether they're bigger or smaller. And I think you might be surprised too. Like you might have a sense, I found with our competitors, you might think they're bigger than they really are in terms of team, money. There could be like very wealthy investors behind the number 5 player in your space. And it's better to reach out to them to talk about. And we didn't get into that, but that's tricky. Like how do you you reach out to competitors and say you're thinking about selling without kind of, getting the shark out. You can kind of say you're thinking about buying them and then start the discussion. And then, then you can kind of tease out whether they'd be like, oh no, we're not going to sell because we have, we're actually buying. Oh, okay. And then take as a partner. I mean, it's different. I mean, I don't know. I think I'm generally open and I talk about that stuff a lot. Like but I realize like it's really sensitive for people and they don't, stuff. And so part of the reason I'm putting this out here is like if you watch this because you're a Paid Memberships Pro user and you're thinking about selling, or you're like you've been through this, or you're about to go through this, or you have experience in this, I would love to hear feedback. Like reach out, join the community, tap me. It'd be good to get more experience about this and kind of more conversation about it and figure out, is there more content, tools, or connections or things like that we can give people who are going through this or thinking about it, and we can help you. And I think some version of the valuation stuff and the business planning stuff, it's good. Like I said, a lot of PM Pro users it doesn't work out the first year. And sometimes it doesn't work out because they don't think about the numbers the right way. Like they build up, I don't know, they get caught. They're like, I did all these things right, but actually it wasn't a sustainable business. And a lot of those things that make a business look good to sell are the things that make it a sustainable business to keep running. And so I feel like a lot of this content will work its way in other forms to help people just like run sustainable businesses on their membership sites. So I'm excited about that content too. So hit us up, give us comments, join the community, talk with us. We can keep doing more of this for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's ever any other open office hour topics that you're interested, let us know about that as well, because we're always coming up with ideas. So, thank you, everybody. We will see you back next Friday for Coding with Sam.
All right.